when I was in the toughest times and I was able to pull myself through, how did I do it? What were some of the elements that made the biggest difference in your life when you did those turnarounds, when you made it through whatever was your toughest times? For me, those toughest times in the very beginning were when I was just a kid and my mom and dad separated, and my mom thought I was on my dad's side, so she kicked me out. She kicked him out already. He'd moved back east, and I was literally sleeping in my car trying to figure out how to survive. And, homeless, trying to figure out what to do. I had to figure out, what am I going to do to change myself? Because first I was just depressed and overwhelmed, and I felt like there was nothing I could do. I had a similar experience in a different way at a totally different stage of life. In my early 30s, when suddenly I was diagnosed of having a tumor in my brain. And all of a sudden, your whole life becomes total uncertainty. And what do you do to turn things around? Well, at the most fundamental level, I did 5 things. And these are the 5 that I invite you to consider and look at your life to either take yourself to the next level, be able to thrive during these difficult times, or turn yourself around so you can begin to thrive. The first thing I believe you got to do to turn yourself around is really take control of your mind, or specifically, you got to feed and strengthen the mind. The mind is an interesting place, isn't it? I mean, fear can take us over. Uncertainty kind of unleashes all these thoughts that make us start to believe very often that things will always be bad, that we'll never be able to turn it around, or that we don't have the capability. It's just the nature of those inner voices that everybody feels at times. Now, maybe you're not feeling it right now, but I'm sure there are times that you have. So to take control of your focus, what do? Well, I was told all of a sudden I had a tumor, or way back when I'm on my own trying to figure out what to do, I realized that somehow to take control of my mind, I had to feed it. That if I didn't feed my mind, I'd be living on the weeds that came around me. I mean, today, if all you do is, pick up your phone, you've got all kinds of messages that are going to get your full attention, or flip on Google and check out the news, or watch CNN, or whatever it is you do, it's constantly coming at us. One of my first teachers, Jim Rohn, taught me something years ago. He said, Tony, every day you got to stand guard at the door of your mind. He said, I'll give you a good lesson. He said, think about this. What if your worst enemy in the whole world came and dropped some sugar in your coffee? He said, what would happen to you? And I was just a 17-year-old kid just getting started. And I said, what do you mean? I'd have sweet sugar. He said, that's right. He said, what if your best friend, with the best intention in the world, dropped 1 drop of strychnine in your coffee? I said, I'd be dead. He goes, that's right. So remember, life is both sugar and strychnine, and you better stand guard at your coffee. Stand guard at the door of your mind, because things feed in there and you start to accept them. They start to become beliefs. You start to make up meanings that take over your life. My fastest way of combating that when I was first brand new, just trying to figure out what to do with my life, was to read. And I was poor. I was literally sleeping in my car, so I'm ancient enough to remember when there wasn't an internet, and when I would go to the library. And I would go to that library, and my whole goal was feed the mind. Feed the mind for at least an hour minimum a day, and sometimes more than that, where I would read somebody's biography. I'd read the story of somebody who went through some unbelievably difficult time and how they turned it around. And it gave me perspective. Or I'd read a book like As a Man Thinketh. If you haven't read it, it's worth reading again and again. You can read the book in about 20 minutes. Or I'd read Man's Search for Meaning, where all of a sudden Viktor Frankl, a man who was literally living at that time in Auschwitz, losing all of his family, and he figured out how to make it through that time and add value. These stories, these things fed my mind something nutritious, something strong. If we are what we eat, we are what we read, we are what we listen to. Later on, I began to feed my mind, about understanding the ideas around health principles and how people had turned themselves around who had tumors, who had cancer. I did the same thing most of my life, starting when I was 17, by listening to audio tapes. I went out, I was constantly feeding my mind. I didn't let or hope that a good idea would interrupt me or interject itself upon me. I knew a great idea had to be pursued. I had to go after it. I had to feed and strengthen my mind every single day. So I did it with audio tapes, I did it with books, and I did it by literally doing incantations, saying to myself something over and over again with such intensity till my mind began to believe it. So reading, listening, feeding your mind is the first step to get out of that place of uncertainty and to start to re-tap into your real ability to thrive in any environment. What's the second key? Well, number 2 is you got to feed and strengthen your body. As simple as that sounds, if you've been around any of my work at all, I believe physiology first. And sometimes even try to feed your mind. You can feed it, but those thoughts keep coming back. What's going to change that mind faster than anything else is a radical change in your body. A radical shift in your physiology. How do you do it? Well, Think about this. When times are really uncertain, fear creeps in. And what is fear? Fear is something quite physical. It takes a hold of you when it's really there and intense. We've all had that gut level fear, that dark night of the soul at times where it feels like, nothing's going to work. So how do you turn it around? Yeah, you feed your mind, but you also strengthen that body. When's the last time you really pushed yourself? You went on a run, a slight jog or a walk, but at the end, you pushed yourself for that last 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it was, till you felt like your heart was pumping up, like going to spit out blood, where there was an intensity in you. I know I sound over the top, but that's how I turned myself around. Way back then, when I was literally just starting my journey, I was 38 pounds heavier than I am now, and I was starting to feed my mind, but it wasn't enough. I had to really feed my body, and the way I did it is I decided to go on this run. I picked up, these, in those days I had cassette tapes. Again, that's how ancient I am, sorry. There was a time before, iPods or anything of that nature, and I listened to this song, this cassette tape. It was by this group, and it was a female group called Heart, and the song was Barracuda, I'll never forget. And I went out there and I decided to go on a run. I hadn't run for God only knows how long, years. And I had a nice big fat belly. But again, I pushed myself so hard, like I had nothing left, and I pushed myself even more. And when that blood started rushing in me, when that was pumping in my brain and my body, or go out and lift weights, go out and push yourself and feel yourself have to force through whatever was your limitation before. When that gets inside you, that physical strength again, that sense of breaking through, every part of you starts to operate differently. Your body changes, so does your mind. What's the third key? Well, that third step is you got to get a role model that inspires you and really shows you the way. One of the biggest things that'll change you once you're mentally and physically strong is you need to believe. You need to not just have a sense of certainty, but you got to believe that there is a pathway to get to where you want to be. Whatever it is you want to change, whether it be your body, your mind, your emotions, your finances, your relationship, you need a role model. So, for example, last October, I realized I only had a few minutes to be on television. How do I get these people that think they've lost their nest egg and it'll never come back to not just think I'm being positive, but show them a real example? That's what a role model is, I should say. It's a real example. So I thought, well, the best example is just show them history. So at that time, they interviewed me and they said, well, many stocks have gone from $80 and in the last few months they're down to $8. And I said, well, let me tell you the good news and the bad news. Some of those $8 stocks are going to be $5 or $2 or $1. Many of them are going to go to 75 cents. And, people were hold back and saying, well, that's not very positive. I said, well, here's what's positive. If you study the patterns of history, if you look back to what happened in the 1930s, if you see what happened in the 1970s, during that time as well, when the market went through this huge crash in the Depression or in the 70s, there was a period of time not that long afterwards when there was this big growth. An $8 stock that went down to $1 or 75 cents didn't make it back to $80 right away. That took decades. But a 75-cent stock that had been $80 or 50 or 60 would go from 75 cents to $5 literally in a month or 2 or 3. It's happened twice before. It's happened during the same pattern. There's a role model for this. That means you would go from 75 cents to $5. That's a 2,000% increase. That's a greater return than most investors will see over their entire lifetime. It can happen in 2 or 3 months. You can make it back. Now, I said, but I don't know if now's the time to jump in. I just know that time is coming. You got to study it. And then, I told investors, look at Sir John Templeton. He had just passed away a few months before. I was fortunate enough to know him. If you don't know the name, he's one of the greatest investors in history. And he became an investor, a billionaire, I should say, by being an investor, and he started with $10,000. How do you do that? He did it because he believed you make all your money at times of maximum pessimism. That was his role model. In 1939, the Depression is going on, Hitler invades Poland, and he's in a place where all heck is breaking loose, and he took his $10,000 and he invested it all he could in the stock market, bought stocks that cost $1. Many of these stocks were near bankruptcy. But what do you think happened after the war? Things got back to normal. The season always comes back. He became a billionaire from those investments. He invested in Japan when no one would invest in Japan because no role model would do that. They just got bombed. The country's down to mud and dirt. He bought things for pennies that grew and he sold them for a huge profit. If you're looking to make your business successful today and you're trying to think, how do I do this in this tight economy? Look around at role models. Who around you is still doing well? There are people. You just got to find them. Look at Zappos. Zappos is a company that only a few years ago was sitting around in a garage, and in this economy, they're thriving, selling shoes. They're going to do $1 billion this year. Or better yet, if you're just feeling like you lost your job, you've lost your home, you've lost your income, your nest egg, or you're facing just unbelievable challenge, then look at somebody like a Nick V. If you don't know who I'm talking about, go to my blog and watch a video of him. I'm shortening his name. It's very hard to pronounce his name. I'll be respectful, but I've got his whole story there. You can watch it. Here's a guy that was born with no arms and no legs. I mean, literally, he can't dress himself, can't move, can't feed himself. He wanted to die. He was totally depressed. And in one day, he figured out a different way of looking at life. He somehow began to strengthen his mind and body, and he got a different role model of what was possible inside of himself. And now he inspires people all over the world. Little kids who think they have a big problem, adults who think they have a big problem, meet him and go, how does he even make a phone call? And you'll see him do it. He's got this one little web foot. Please go see it. You'll be inspired. We all need contrast sometimes. Not only role models of how to get it done and be successful, but role models of how to deal with our problems and our challenges. So get a role model that'll inspire you and show you the way.